So I'm going to talk about leadership. I've been in business for 35 years. Some things have changed, fortunately. Other things haven't, like why I come into work every day. But what have I learned in 35 years? I'm going to cover two things: surprises and experiments. The first is to savor surprises. Let me start with a story. We'll look at Intuit revenue and Quicken revenue. So you can see Quicken revenue in 1993 is the same as it is today. But the company has grown dramatically, so that today Quicken is only a tiny slice, less than 5% of our revenue. I'm going to cover the story of that part of the revenue. So we launched Quicken, which was personal finance software, with great difficulty. We struggled. We almost went out of business twice. It was quite hard. In those struggling days, we did a little bit of follow-up research to understand who the early users were. And at the end, it had the standard demographic profiling, age, gender, occupation, income, and it asked, where are you using it? Home, office, or both? Well, half the respondents used it in an office. Well, that made no sense. Businesses keep books using accounting, debit and credit accounting. And Quicken didn't do that, so we ignored it. Struggles continued. Eventually, we got to a more successful patch, but we kept understanding our customers, and they kept telling us that half of them used it in an office. But that made no sense, so we ignored it. Years later, it just got to bug me. Why are people answering that question wrong? So, for the first time, we went out and really interviewed them, talked to them, that group of customers, about what they were doing and why. And then we talked to more folks, and what we learned was something about debit and credit accounting, which is, if you ask any expert, they'll tell you the only way to keep books in a business is with debits and credits. Now, let's do a little survey. How many of you here took accounting in school? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you who liked accounting in school? Keep your hand up. Okay, where's the finance partner for the administrative partner for the firm, probably? There's always a few, and that's good, but for most people, they hate accounting. In fact, they know they don't know it. They can't tell a debit from a credit, and they don't want to learn. And this is true in a small business. You got 10 people in a business, you don't have room for a trained CPA. So the poor schlump who gets to take care of the books, the owner's spouse, an unfortunate clerk, 90% of these cases, these are people who think the general ledger is a World War II hero. That's why they were using Quicken, because it promised to keep financial records with no accounting. So they are bending a product never meant for a business to be used in a business. So we said, well, what if we actually built something for a business? And so that's what led us years later to develop and ship QuickBooks, which we pitched as the alternative. It's accounting with not a speck of accounting in it. Now, the launch had trouble. The product had less than half the features of the pre-existing accounting products, and we charged twice the price. So one could say we're only off by fourfold. Plus, we had bugs, lots of bugs. But at the end of the first full month in the market, QuickBooks became the market leader, past all existing rivals. Today, QuickBooks, the desktop version that you might be familiar with from the history books, has a 90% share. And QuickBooks Online, the SaaS version, has a 75% share. This is a much larger business than our Quicken business. All came about because we solved business's biggest problem in keeping the books. And that came about only because we finally savored a surprise that we had ignored for years. Well, it turns out this is not entirely unusual. There are a number of businesses in Silicon Valley who wind up succeeding in a business very different from what they started in. PayPal. This is from the Palm Info Center. And the reason is Palm's original business, well, let me bring along the description from Wired magazine when they covered the Palm announcement. California software startup launches PayPal. This is December of 1999. An application that will allow individuals to beam sums of money between handheld devices such as mobile phones, Palm Pilots, and pagers. So just as like you can beam business cards, you could beam money between Palm Pilots. They quoted CEO Peter Thiel, Quote, every one of your friends will become like a virtual miniature ATM. That's an interesting way to view your friends, but that was the quote at the launch of PayPal. And that's why you see it being marketed here in the Palm Info Center. Well, that business fizzled. The business that succeeded was nothing they had anticipated. In fact, I've talked to people who were in the Palm management team at the time, the PayPal management team, who actively argued against doing what I'm about to say. So what succeeded? Some consumer out there emailed them saying, I want to use PayPal to settle my eBay auction. The debate ensued. Fortunately, PayPal said yes, and it was eBay auction settlement that caused PayPal to explode, and only eBay auction settlement. Totally different business than they anticipated. Other examples in science, surprises often happen. The invention of the X-ray was totally a surprise, an accidental discovery. Twitter, they had a really good idea, but what people have done with it since, the founders have told me, is one surprise after another. More in science. The invention of penicillin was a scientific experiment gone bad. And fortunately, Fleming recognized that he wasn't getting the result he wanted. He might be getting something entirely better and different. So, savor surprises. That's learning number one. Learning two has a lot to do about leadership and the type of leadership my dad owned. My dad is 91. He learned leadership as a junior officer in the Navy in World War II. And that's when the view of a leader was the leader framed the options, made the decision, and told everybody what to do. And that worked. It certainly worked at D-Day. But as I look at leadership now and the role that I and others play, the most gifted leaders, it's a lot less like Eisenhower and a lot more like Thomas Edison. And by that I mean it's leadership by experiment, or more specifically, decision-making by hypothesis testing, where teams formulate numeric hypotheses and then do fast, cheap experiments in order to measure behavior and use that to drive the decision. Here's a story. This is a team in San Diego where our TurboTax headquarters is. Their goal is they're trying to liberate people from the clutches of H&R Block. And they thought one way to do that, to make people more confident to use technology instead of a store, is to fill in the taxes for you. So they started experimenting with ideas, and they had some disappointments. They had some surprises. They did rapid iteration. Here's an example of the rapid iteration on a new concept. Their concept was, can we take the phone and use it to snap a picture of your W-2? And then from that, OCR the information off it and fill in that section of your tax return for you. Originally, they were going to put this as a feature in the mainstream of TurboTax. But again, surprise learning from people they had in pilot tests suggested that we should make a phone-only app. So here's what they launched in January. Audio.
One more way you can choose easy.
So that was launched in January with no marketing budget behind it, and it's been a barn burner. The reviews in the App Store on both Google and the Apple, the iPhone are tremendous. It's 5 stars, finished as the #1 free finance app in both. You pay at the end, by the way. All from a team who was willing both to run experiments and then to act on the surprises that happen. This changes decision-making from the boss voting with their opinion to customers voting with their feet and driving the decision from the customer. Now, here's an example which the bosses would have voted no to. So we have teams in India. We have about 400 engineers in India. And we gave them the challenge of trying to improve the financial lives of people in India. Well, one team went out and spent time with farmers. That's the largest occupation and the largest percent of the population in total live in farm families. What could we do? Is there anything we could do to solve a big problem to improve farmers' financial lives? Well, they spent time in the farms with farmers in their homes, and they discovered a problem they thought we could do something about. When the farmers are done and harvest off their little plots, they don't know where to take their goods to get the highest price. Do I drive north to the village market to the north, or south to the village market to the south, or to the east? And once I get there, how do I know what prices are so I don't get rooked by the middleman? Well, the team had an idea, and within 7 weeks of coming up with the idea, ran a real test with real farmers. They jimmied up some phones, they faked it, kind of like Wizard of Oz, man behind the curtain, didn't build the software behind, to see if we could give farmers prices from their local markets, and would they actually trust that and use that to improve their decision-making and their ability to get a better price. Well, that experiment, 7 weeks after the idea came up, worked. So they then, and it just puts farm prices for the commodities you grow on a standard cell phone through SMS. Well, they kept experimenting. They've now done 13 experiments, and the system now has 250,000 farmers in India using it. 90% report higher incomes, and the average is a take-home income from their crops 20% higher than they had before. This is an instant anti-poverty program, and it makes the users very loyal. And I can tell you, as one of the leaders who would have said no, this would not have happened if the boss had done the voting. What this does is move decision-making from the norm in companies, which was politics and PowerPoint, to enabling ideas to prove themselves. Now that changes the role of leaders. Instead of leaders being the Caesar to decide which ideas go and don't, instead the leader's role changes to one where, whenever possible, you can't run experiments on everything, but I'm surprised how often you can. And whenever possible, the leader needs to champion a grand challenge, like improve the lives of 1.2 billion people in India. And then install systems that make it easy for teams to run fast, cheap experiments. And then savor the surprises and the learnings, including the failures, and live by the same rules. Now, done right, that creates a culture of rampant experimentation. And here's what such a culture looks like. So here's another example. This is Dan Maurer. He runs the TurboTax business for Intuit. He's got a few dozen people who run the website. The goal of the website is to convert visitors into people who use TurboTax Online, the totally online version. When he took over, initially as head of marketing, there were, in that year, 7 experiments run on the website. So if you got a group of a few dozen people, what's the odds that your idea will actually get tested? Well, low. Well, he's changed that, installed systems and a culture that makes it easy. So ideas are now tested on a week cycle. New ideas go up on Thursday. They're active over the weekend. They're read on Monday. Decisions are then made. New experiments and iterations are built. They go up on Thursday. Cycle repeats. This past tax season, they ran 165 experiments in about a 2.5-month period. Now, if you're one of the 24 people on the team, what are the odds that your idea are going to get tested? Really good. And so how do you feel as a person? How do you feel about being valued? How do you feel about your ideas and ability to learn from trying out your ideas in the second culture compared to the first? Now, business results. Conversion rate over this period is up 50%. That's not 50 points. That's a percent of a percent. Now, can you do strategy by experiment? Or does that need some new process or different? This is Alex Lintner, who is the Intuit General Manager for Global. He challenged our Indian teams, as I said, to come up with ways to improve the lives of Indians and set up systems so they could run rapid experiments. They ran 12 experiments of totally new businesses, each different from the last. Of those, 8 failed. Now, I read this as good news and good news, because that means there were 4 successes. That also means we rapidly eliminated 4 total wastes of human endeavor and time. As Thomas Edison said, I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Now, the question I'd ask CEOs, particularly of larger companies, and this presentation was targeted on people in larger companies. I'm sure many of you do this as your main approach. But in folks in larger companies, I ask them, how soon can your new hires run experiments on real customers? This is Tad and Vlad. They'd been with us 4 months from college when they observed that how Intuit processes ideas inside the company sucked. And they said we could do better. Fortunately, they caught the ear of a manager who freed one of them up, and he built a system that it's kind of like Amazon reviews meet Facebook meets Twitter. It allows anyone in the company to, within a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to enter their idea. And then it allows those ideas to improve through organic processes in the company. It allows people to comment, to build on the idea, all without managers getting involved. And then it allows teams to self-assemble. So if someone says, well, I kind of need a Java programmer to make this happen. The programmer says, well, we kind of need a designer. Who can volunteer? And it allows teams to self-organize, all without managers being involved. The system is called Brainstorm. Within a year of us opening it in the company, and we opened it as an experiment, and it just took off. Within a year of opening, 32 ideas that had started in Brainstorm had made their way into Intuit products. So far this fiscal year, we're about 9 months through, 5,200 ideas have been entered into Brainstorm. Now, we built this for our own use. It's an internal tool. We work with a couple outside companies. One of them heard we had this and called Tad and started asking him questions about it, and he answered all the questions. A few weeks later, they called back and said, hey, Tad, congratulations, you've won the RFP. He said, wow, what RFP? And this other company, Vistaprint, said, we are going out to find the very best idea system to put into our company. We've looked at all the commercially available ones. Yours is better. We want to buy it. He said, well, we're not set up to sell it. It's just something we built for ourselves. But they insisted, so we gave them a really discount price on something that was not ready for another company. Strange how this stuff happens. We now have 20 companies who are using Brainstorm, and Tad and Vlad still run the business. Another surprise. Now, to me, this is not only vastly better for the people in our company and for our company, but I also think it's key for countries. So the question is, can you set policy this way? Well, one country has, and that country is China. So this is Deng Xiaoping. When he took over China roughly in 1980, the country was economically a wreck. They did not have the jobs to support their people, even at the poverty level. Starvation was rampant. This is Shenzhen in 1980. Downtown, the fancy part of town. Well, what did they do? Deng Xiaoping did many things, but one thing he did was run experiments. One experiment was to take Shenzhen and put a wall around it and run it under different economic rules. While the rest of China remained under communistic economic rules, Shenzhen was converted to much more of a free market system. Well, you know what happened. The experiment worked, and the Chinese economic miracle really emanates from the experiment that was run in Shenzhen starting in 1980. And this is Shenzhen today. I think this is another example of the power of moving from politics and PowerPoint to enabling ideas to prove themselves, which is leadership by experiment, which to me is another key to leadership in the Agile age. With that, thank you. The clock says we have time for a couple questions. Jeff.
I'm Jeff Pomper from a company called Zombie. One thing that struck me about the Brainstorm idea that was internally generated and growing to be able to business of itself is how do you maintain focus for an organization at the same time experiment on new ideas? Obviously, when you're dealing with 50 employees, the challenge of focus is different than when you're dealing with, I guess, 20,000.
Yeah, so the question is how to maintain focus in an organization, and what does something like an unintended business like Brainstorm mean about focus? I would still classify, I think you're absolutely right, focus is absolutely crucial in a team of 5, in a company of 50, or in our case, in a company of 7,700 people. We're just now going through our annual strategy reviews. Each business unit comes in. We have 10 business units. And I'd say a challenge for all but one of them is focus. They're not sufficiently focused. They have too many ideas, too many things going. I would say, in my view, Brainstorm is still just an experiment. The same 2 guys run it. It is still an experiment. It is not part of our focus. Our focus is clearly here. But we can allow an experiment to go as long as people understand that's not a focus. That's an experiment. And if it's really going to be great and important, it doesn't need our focus in this case. We'll only do something like that if it proves itself without needing to throw a lot of resources at it. So I believe that a leader has to adopt and focus the company and align people tightly on a focus while running some experiments on the side. And while using experiments in the main focus to figure out how to do it even better. Now, if one of those experiments pops, like QuickBooks, and shows that it's even bigger an idea than this one, the leader then switches over here. So it's a ambidextrous thing, intense focus where you've determined running experiments to help promote that while you have some going on the side. At least that's the best answer I've been able to find. Okay, yes, right there. A bit more of a description. Yeah. A bit more of a description. I described it at summary level pretty well. It's an opening that allows anyone to enter any idea and anyone to comment on any idea. And then it tracks traffic statistics so anyone can see which ideas are getting more internal activity inside the company. Anytime people put messages in, it pings the person who put the message in so you know that there are responses. It allows teams to mount documents and plans so you can use it as your central planning place, which makes the team now an open thing that anyone in the company can see. So if people want to volunteer, they can see what's going on. We have unstructured time in the company, so folks get a chunk of their time they can spend doing anything they want. So it allows people to find and align with their personal time the kind of idea that might be much better than the idea they have. And so that's how it does the self-organizing team nature. So I think those are some of the terms. I think key is some of the culture around it. If we didn't have the unstructured time for people, I'm not sure, in a tightly wound organization, I'm not sure it would work as well. I don't think we've thought about that. I'll ask. I don't know.
Probably have time for one more question. Will?
How much time do you allocate to
Yeah, I don't think it actually matters. I don't think it... yes, it's the permission to be working on stuff your boss didn't assign you. Okay? So we call it 10%. We had Marissa in from Google, and she spoke at one of our engineering gatherings and was asked the question, hey, isn't 20% a lot better than 10? And she said, doesn't matter. It's the permission to work on your own thing. The time, in fact, because your day job doesn't go away, the time comes out of your personal time. You work nights, weekends, that sort of stuff. But on something you're passionate about, people love that.
Good.
Okay.
So for people that run these comedy experiments and they're successful, how do you continue to reward them or let them own that as it grows up? Is there any kind of process in place where you said Tad's still running the brainstorm thing? So how do you reward the people after?
Yeah. So the question is, how do you reward the people who run the experiments when an experiment is successful? We've spent a little time trying to understand that. We have had for 6-7 years innovation awards in the company. Roughly 20 people get them a year off about 8 projects. And we have a whole process to have nominations and select which ones were truly novel to the world or not novel to the world but achieved only over substantial internal opposition. So we give recognition to those folks. And then 3 years ago, we wanted to amp up that program more. So we went to the winners to study what kind of rewards we should add. And the going-in hypothesis was money, some form of stock options, money, that sort of thing. What we found by talking to the award winners was the number one thing they wanted was time. Time to work on their next innovation. That was far more important. So what we do now is we give them a choice of either 3 months off from all their day responsibilities to work on whatever they want next, or 6 months at halftime. Now, to help them find what they might find interesting, because sometimes they don't have their next idea. We pioneered, one of our people came up with this idea, and we experimented with it, and the BU leaders thought it was nuts. We do a reverse trade show where we have the business unit general managers in the booths with their posters about the big problems and challenges they're trying to solve. And the Innovation Award winners are going around from booth to booth, and the GMs are trying to talk the Innovation Award winners, some of whom are relatively new with the company, into working on their project and why their unit is so valuable and why this idea would be so cool if you'd only work on it. So the GMs thought this was nuts at first. It worked great. Of course, we serve ample liquor and things like that, and so people are feeling really good by the end. But it now creates a matching algorithm, without the math, to enable Innovation Award winners to find what are some of the biggest challenges around the company that they can choose. Interestingly, of all the units, now the functional groups are in there too, of all the units the last go-around, the unit who got more innovation winners to want to do their projects was the HR team, because they sent in one of their recruiting heads to run the booth. So they were giving away tchotchkes. They were, because HR people, if they're good, know how to recruit. So now, what's the learning from that? My takeaway, and this is buttressed by same finding in other settings inside Intuit, the biggest thing that innovators want is they want their idea to become real. They want the company to help them accelerate, remove barriers, get that thing out there so they can learn and so the world can see it. That's all the reward they want, is help making their idea real. And so that's where we've been trying to maximize. That's where Brainstorm fits, et cetera. Now, we do have a program that we do give them a salary bump, and they get vacation. They can take their spouse or partner on. And we do have a program to give some big dollars to somebody who makes a giant difference. But we haven't had to do that yet. So anyway, time, not money.
Thanks a lot, Scott, for